I'll record. I'll record. Right. So yeah, I thought I'd just lay down a few lines to start with. I think we'll use breakout rooms for part of the session so that we're not in such a large group. But I thought what it might be a good idea to start the meeting off with is if we each take a minute or two just to unpack very briefly what our position is on this, right? So what we see, why are we here today, right? Why is this conversation of interest to us? Do we think that totalitarianism is encroaching? Why do we think that? And yeah, that's it really. Do try and keep it to a minute or two. And I would ask as well, while we're in a large group like this, that when you're speaking, that you really try to be concise and limit the amount of time that you take the floor up for and allow other people a chance to contribute as well. It can be very, very frustrating and dull, frankly, when one person dominates the conversation. So please do try to be concise. So while I've got the floor, I'll kick off with my reasons for this. I mean, very much like what Clint said. I mean, the authoritarianism, totalitarianism, in my view, have been gradually creeping and creeping and creeping for a good deal of time now. But it seems to me that that the move towards this has accelerated dramatically in the last year or two, mainly because of COVID. And so it's actually scaring the bejesus out of me now. And so part of the reason I've called this is hoping that there's going to be people who are able to reassure me and show me why, you know, I'm exaggerating the threat in my own mind, kind of thing. So I'm hoping that not everyone is thinking pretty much the same way as I am in this room, but we'll see. So that's me done. In fact, why doesn't the person speaking call on the next person? So Brian, my eyes fell on you. Why don't you go next? When you're done, you call the next person in.
Yeah, I can do that. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. I'm just in the process. I'm going to drop a link into the chat window for a recently published article I did at Medium. Give me just a second. Because totalitarianism is very much at the center of so there's the link. I've been tracking primarily fascism initially, and going back probably over the better part of the last 15 years. And I've done some coursework, online coursework starting the latter part of 2013, and had taken a political science course through Stanford in contemporary democracy, comparative global democracy. And it was authoritarianism came up kind of as a political ideology at that point. I'd venture a distinction between authoritarianism and totalitarianism. Totalitarianism, to me, seems it's a mode of centralized control and management, where authoritarianism may be more kind of a political grounding or structure. Kind of what they say, there's only a single China constitutes, no, I'm sorry, Korea, I think, constitutes the only authoritarian form of governance on the planet right now. I'm currently, so if you're looking at the article, you can see, get an idea of where I'm coming from a recently published article. I'm going to space his name. James had done on totalitarianism, was kind of a contemporary rant. He had done an interview with Jim Rutt on the Jim Rutt Show, and so that was kind of the inspiration for the article in a very contemporary sense. I'm currently reading. Can
you wind it up, please, Brian? Let the next person.
Yeah, will do. I will do. So just within the last week or so, I had initiated, as I mentioned in my introduction, a project involving David Sloan Wilson with respect to evolution, and am reading Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's The Future of Man. And that was a compilation of essays between 1920 and 1952, Teilhard passing away in 1955. But that work and Teilhard's vision is riddled with totalitarianism as kind of a counterpart, or it's unclear, quite frankly, what the role of totalitarianism with respect to what Teilhard envisioned as a planetization of humankind. So that's kind of a big overview. Thanks for giving me the time to do that. I appreciate it.
You want to choose the next person as well?
Yeah, Jubilee, let's go to you. I'm curious what kind of brings you to all this.
So totalitarianism, to me, is, I don't have a specific definition. To me, it is synonymous with authoritarianism in my head. But this idea that in order to, the totalitarianism, the definition is kind of that somebody's in power that doesn't agree with my values and my how we should run the world. And my distinction in that definition is that I think that to fight totalitarianism, you have to work with people that don't agree with you. You have to find out how to do it from the grassroots up without it being, okay, well, if the people in charge agree with my values, then I'm okay with it. But if they don't agree with my values, then it's against me. It's zooming out and saying, okay, well, how do we get all of our needs met and all of our values met without needing to go up against the government and up against big money and big power? How do we actually consolidate at the grassroots level? How do we dissipate that power so that I hate having anything in power over me, and I don't want to be in power over anyone else. I want to interweave that power in society. And I have a lot of ideas on how to get there, but getting there sometimes involves realizing when I'm putting power over somebody else, when I'm trying to be totalitarian, not in my own life, but in somebody else's life, dictating how they should live their lives, and dealing with that energy, I think at a community level and an individual level can get us to a world that is designed to not allow totalitarianism. And the fastest way to it is the creating enemies, making my neighbors into enemies that I want to fight. And it's very easy to do that if we allow it, because there's always a reason to dislike someone. There's always a reason to like someone. So finding those areas where we can agree and where we can work together. And that is me. And I will call on Shannon.
Thank you, Jubilee. Interesting. I am of the perspective that where energy goes, where attention goes, energy flows. And if we withdraw our energy from the concept of governmental controls, that they will naturally just fall apart. And that's happening in our world already. And by concentrating our energies on the places where we are and online with people who are of like mind, we will be able to create naturally the world that we desire. And respecting the places where people are that naturally arise through the needs and resources of the people that are there will allow us to create unique places that are wombs of creation that are interconnected around the world. Unique places that serve the needs of the residents and the system of flowing energies that is the one that we are. And that's the totalitarianism that I believe is arising throughout humanity. It is not the power over, it is the power through. And it's happening as we speak. And the more we are aware of it and allow it to happen and encourage it, the faster it's going to happen. I think it's going to be automatic myself. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. And it's through conversations like this that we find the way. Simon, talk to us.
Thank you. As you do, yes. I'm not sure I know the difference between totalitarianism and authority. What was the other one? I forget now. I think totalitarianism is there all the time. The opposite of it is freedom. And we're only allowed a certain degree of freedom. If I'm allowed freedom by somebody else, then by definition, it's a system of totalitarianism. I think at the moment, what we're all sensing, it's like an oppressiveness that freedom is being withdrawn. For whatever reason, it just doesn't suit them anymore. I feel like we're all frankly just free-range slaves. And it's an illusion. I mean, it's like an animal, you know, an animal will be in the field and quite happily graze, and then it will walk into the pen and off to the abattoir when it's time, when it's told. And I think that's where we are. We're at a stage where it's time for us to go to the abattoir if we're not careful. I don't want to be too extreme about it, but it kind of feels like that at the moment, that we've had our time of things ebb and flow, and we've been allowed a certain degree of freedom but that's just an oxymoron. If we're allowed freedom, then we're not free. So yeah, Tom.
Hey, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree. It's a spectrum of, you know, there's always more or less totalitarianism. I guess, yeah, there's a couple of things I've thought of so far. One is like I tend to think of stuff sort of technologically, especially like if you think about cars and transport, like the kind of, you know, moving away from petrol vehicles towards like autonomous vehicles, like there's that kind of thing is like a bit of a sort of driving incentive towards more totalitarianism, and, you know, yeah, I don't know. There's technological incentives. That's all I'll say there. And then, yeah, just I don't know. In my own life, I've noticed more well, I guess there is governmental kind of pressure, or pressure from the state in a way to. I don't know. Like if I think of, you know, you think of the vaccine situation, right? And I don't know. I find the pressure has been more social, cultural. It's been more like people, like, you know, like saying things to you and thinking that they, you know, this. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it, but it's just that it's more from noticing it more from people around me, rather than it being like, you know, I haven't had any police officers come in and tell me anything yet about that, but you know, I'm sure there are people out there. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
You went silent there, Tom. Didn't hear what you said at the end. You went silent just at the end.
Sorry, yeah, I probably prematurely muted. I was going to nominate John Kelly. I forgot to nominate, and then I remembered. So let's go with John Kelly. Cheers.
All right, great, thank you. So yeah, it's obviously both authoritarianism and totalitarianism are a continuum. Just to loosen it up a little bit, you could say, especially if you allow, if you take a definition that says, look, if you have to ask for permission, that's at least inappropriate. It's often inappropriate, if not totalitarian. You have to ask permission to have a new idea, to do something different than what's been done before. If you apply that criteria, corporations are totalitarian. Some churches are totalitarian. A number of families are totalitarian. And the government, of course, you know, winds up also having a role to play here. So given that pervasiveness, and also given the new scary thing really is the technologically empowered disinformation. So you get this majority endorsed totalitarianism, populism from a actively misinformed public that's aroused and angry and, you know, and so much of what we have, and it isn't just us, you know, I mean, us, America, you know, we had Trump, we still have that whole mindset, you know, it's still around, it's still dangerous. You know, we could go to other countries. You can name your own guys. You have them in your country. China has them, you know, Hungary has them, Brazil has them, Philippines has them, you know, so, I mean, it's a huge global problem. We don't want to try to boil the ocean. We want to try to figure out, all right, is there an irreducible minimum? Is there a Bill of Rights? Or if you don't want to go that American, is there a universal set of rights that we could promote? Could we get some way to cut across this divide of the government and the corporation and the, you know, et cetera? I mean, those are areas I think that are ripe for exploration, and I hope we're able to do that. And let's see, who else hasn't gone? Have we heard from
Jamin and Clint? I think are the only two that
yeah.
haven't gone.
All right, Clint, can we hear from you?
He did say he might. Oh, he.
Yeah, I got a minute. I agree with I can't remember who it was, but they said that totalitarianism and authoritarianism are pretty much a continuum. They both operate on the same principle. I see the difference between them as being you're going to do what's best for us in totalitarianism, and authoritarianism is we're doing what we think is best for you and you better comply. Like with this pandemic stuff. And, you know, that was probably a combination of both of them. But I don't know. I've watched it happen for over 30 years with seatbelt laws in the United States, and before that, mandatory insurance laws, and a whole bunch of safety products on our equipment that we use safely for 50 years. Suddenly is getting safety devices on it, and you know, we didn't ask for it. Only a handful of stupid people were the ones who used it wrong. Those kinds of things have been happening for over 30 years, and it's just been creeping. And now they think they've come up with a proper time to step in farther. I'm done.
Thanks, Clint. Go ahead, Jamin, if you want to, if you're able to.
Sure. Just a couple of quick thoughts before I step away for half an hour, and then I'll be back again. The way I see it is, I like to put things in the extrema, the two bookends. If we understand the bookends, then we can go into the middle. So one bookend is Donald Trump saying, listen, I alone, I'm the one, I know what's going on better than all of you, and I will fix it. And I think a lot of people find that simplicity and that concentration of, you know, finally there's a daddy in the room who can put some order to this chaos of life on earth. They find that very appealing, right? The other bookend is exactly what we're doing right here. People coming together in a network of conversations. This is one conversation in a vast network. Various other venues have been mentioned. And God bless us for doing this. It's messy, it's chaotic, it takes a lot of time. We don't necessarily agree on a lot of things. And then in the middle, you have things like, American style democracy. What a joke, right? Which is, government by the rich for the rich. We have the best government that money can buy, as my dad would say. Anyway, those are just my 2 cents. Loving the conversation, loving all of you. I'll be checking out for half an hour and then back. Thanks so much. See you all soon.
Thanks, Jamin. Thanks, everyone. That was a really good opening. I think we've got a pretty good sense of where most people are at. It seems to me that one thing that came up repeatedly, and it was kind of in my mind to do this first anyway, was the distinction between totalitarianism and authoritarianism. But more broadly, what do we actually mean when we're talking about totalitarianism? Because I expect each of us brings at least nuances of different meaning to the word, right? If not substantially different meanings to the word. So I thought what we might do is break into rooms of 3 and spend 10, maybe 15 minutes just batting around between the 3 of us what we understand by the term. And also included in that, the other thing I noticed which came up a few times was reference to they. And I do this all the time as well in my language. They have figured out, finally had blah, 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 blah. And so I think it might be also interesting to explore, who do we mean by they when we say they? Who do we think we're actually talking about? Or is it just some vague, don't really have any sense of what it means at all? So I think if we spend maybe 15 minutes in breakout rooms of 3 discussing those 3 questions, and we'll come back together and share what's come up in our rooms. And do a bit of cross-pollination of ideas like that. Does that sound like a reasonable course of action to everyone? Okay, so give me a moment to create the rooms. If you don't get an invitation to join a room, it means you're staying here. Yes. Okay, so feel free, anyone from any of the rooms, feel free to jump in with in particular, whatever synthesis you arrived at in your room, right? What that came out of it in terms of what is totalitarianism and who are they? Just jump in as you will.
Can I contribute briefly? Because we had a really interesting conversation that Shannon initiated that I didn't see coming, but it was very interesting, to the extent that we discussed how the world, to take Jonathan's point, is almost like the macro manifestation of the family, and a dysfunctional and a healthy family, and how we can learn, where does a family go wrong, and how does that expand to the entire world? Clint raised a very interesting point that it's nobody else's job to save us from ourselves. Use the example of the seatbelt. It's made no real difference in terms of fatalities. It was all brought in, Jonathan's point on the economics, because of money, the insurance companies. It was nothing to do with saving people's lives, a bit like the whole COVID thing, I guess. But yeah, the relationship between, again, Jonathan's point, really interesting, the fact that the family operates within small communities, and that keeps it functional. As we expand, as we've increased to the global level, and I would argue the whole global thing on most levels has been a disaster. And I don't think we can introduce security at a global level. I think we need to get back to the local level to turn the tide on the march of totalitarianism. But looking at it through the prism of the family was just a really interesting angle. That's it.
Yeah, it's both, isn't it? We have to recover the values that exist in intimate community, but at the same time, you can't unring certain bells, right? There are weapons in this world. There are destructive technologies that need to be, and potentially destructive technologies coming on the way, which need to be harnessed in non-destructive ways, right? And so there does need to be global governance at the same time as the nourishment obtained by living in intimate community. I don't know how you fuse these 2 things together, but it seems to me like that is one way of framing the modern challenge.
Our group was doing something along those lines, and I'm sorry, Jubilee had said that she needed to go at the top of the hour, so I kind of regret losing her input, but one of the things that we were doing, and I think I began to pick up on revisiting the other room here, was distinction between the dimensions of epistemology, or knowledge, and that of ontology, or being, and how across levels of scale, which you seem to be referring to here, that's part of the complexity, and part of the challenge of being of doing anything in terms of impact. And the scale of impact is to kind of a shared in collective dimensions of experience, conscious awareness, you know, and I think involving energy. You know, it's the mobilizing and directing energy with respect to action and impact, and you know, even initiating that action at a more local level, at a smaller scale, how challenging with respect to the complexity that's involved it can be. Thanks.
Is there oh yeah, sorry, go ahead, John, go ahead.
I think we need a lot richer imagination about this, and I mean, there's a few science fiction novels that are, you know, they definitely stretch your mind, but they raise as many questions as they answer. One that comes to mind is called, it's a series of 3, and the first one I think is called Too Like the Lightning. And there's a lot of classical material in there and a lot of stuff that she's doing that's interesting, but not our question. The question that's interesting, I think, is two ideas or 3 ideas. One is you belong to a tribe, but very key idea, it's elective. You get to say, oh, no, I'm going to go to this tribe now, you know, and there are terms, the way she set it up, and you can imagine ways to incentivize this, is that you would, it's in the interest of the tribe to get you, you know, they want you. So there's some competition to get people to join a tribe. The tribes are not geographic. You know, I think we might have to transition from primarily geographically based to non-geographically based tribes. But you can imagine a kind of it's useful exercise to imagine a kind of a budget, both in the moral and in the economic sense, or in the legal sense, to a tribe. You say, well, to qualify as a tribe, you cannot be less diverse than the geography around you. Whoa, what does that do? You know, I mean, that's really hard to administer, but it basically says, no, you can't have a white tribe. You can't have and again, you know, you do this thing where you say, well, you guys were a minority, maybe you can't have a black tribe. But I think it's much better if you say, no, you cannot have a tribe of one race, unless you're living in a country where everybody is that way, you know. But if you're in the United States, you can't have that kind of a tribe. I mean, we just won't. You can try to live that way, but you won't qualify for the benefits. And what are the benefits? Well, some of them are economic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also a carbon budget for the tribe, you know. And maybe if you really want to stretch it, but I don't know if I think this is the last thing you would be able to do, is you say, well, you know, there's a what do we call it? There's a Gini, you know, there's the distance from the poorest to the richest in your tribe, at least as a goal. We're not gonna, you know, kick you out as a tribe, but we're gonna increase your rewards from the central to your tribe if you don't allow that distance to get too large. So you got a carbon budget, you got to don't allow that distance to get too large. You got some, you know, some other kinds of things. And then the central authority steps back, and then the local authority runs with it in terms of creativity, culture, et cetera. It's a very messy, I'm not arguing for this. What I'm arguing is we ought to think about this. We ought to imagine it more rigorously and more creatively than we have so far.
Yeah, it seems like the question you're trying to ask is what are the constraints at big scales that afford the greatest levels of freedom, something like that.
I really like that. That's a really good way of phrasing it, Tom. That's an excellent way of putting it.
I really like it as well, John. The incentivizing the top to come down, to bring the bottom up, to allow everyone to have a better way of life and experience of life. I love that. Thank you.
I'd be interested in, I mean, it's real easy to imagine the opposition to this, but it'd be maybe kind of interesting to brainstorm what are the steps that would not just move us towards that politically, but also inform the steps. Because one of the difficulties we've gotten into is we've picked a philosophical goal or a political goal, and we've said, let's go there, and we haven't thought through the steps, and then there's a backlash.
And also we've demanded that everybody goes there, right? Not like this is where we're going to go, so we're going to go there. If you don't want to come, you can figure out where you want to go, right? And that the freedom to be genuinely diverse, right? This notion of prescribing a certain amount of diversity doesn't sit very well with me. You know, diversity exists across an infinity of possible domains, right? Race is just one, right? By insisting on diversity of race, you might actually be getting a complete lack of diversity in some other dimension which you hadn't considered, right? And so this imposition of these things need to emerge, right? That kind of thing needs to emerge naturally, in my opinion. And you probably thought of this because you mentioned the idea of you can see objections, right? But the idea of any central authority, however benevolent and well-intentioned, saying to everybody, these are the constraints by which you must abide, right? And if you don't, there's some kind of punishment, reward system, blah, blah, blah. You know, this feels to me like a step on the road to the very thing that we're trying to figure out how to not go down is the road towards totalitarianism, right? Figuring out ways for groups of people to emergently decide what constraints they all agree to be bound by, right? And those constraints must become more general and less specific as they start to include larger and larger numbers of groups of people. So yeah, no, it is, as you say, very, very, very messy. But as soon as I start hearing a central authority imposing parameters, I recoil, right? That feels like exactly what we don't want to be doing.
It's kind of fun to imagine there's wokeism and there's tokenism. They're not complete opposites. Okay. But they're, I can understand someone who likes the word woke thinking that the word token, that's bad. We don't want tokenism. Whereas from the point of view of macro diversity, all kinds of multidimensional diversity, you could say, all right, you guys out there in Utah or whatever the heck you are, Liverpool, yeah, you're an entity, you're fine, you're doing fine. Yeah, we're not going to tell you, you got to take these people or those people. However, we will pay you a little more if you took some refugees, or you have more handicapped folks, disabled folks. We'll pay you a little more for that. But it's not going to be a bribe level. We're not going to cover. We're not going to say, well, gee, how much would it cost you to have more disabled people? Oh, let's match that cost. See, no, let's not go there. Let's not go there. Let's just say, hey, look, we recognize this is probably a good thing and that you're going to be experimenting in that area, and we want to encourage that experiment. All right, that's as far as we're going to go.
Jonathan, who are we?
Well, all right. So I was doing we as the central authority, the central taxing authority. Certainly during a transition to this, it would probably have to be the nation state. I don't know how it's actually going to play out. Finally, I mean, I see that there's dangers on all sides.
Just to interject, John, I love that, Simon. Thanks. Yeah, who are we? It's important to keep that in mind. In part, the group as a whole, part of its unity, involves a shared narrative And it's crucial not to forget that. I kind of hear Eric, suggesting that with respect to his reservations involving the imposition of power and authority. That's critical to to kind of keep at the center of the group focus or attention.
Yeah.
There was a point I wanted to make that initiated that, but it's
okay. Well, a great question is, can there be a non-presumptuous central narrative that is evocative and not suppressive?
Okay. So I remember the point I was getting at was with respect to how does one go about quantifying, approaching the subjective qualitative dimensions of our experience as a group, of our shared experience, and the amount of work that just within very recent years, and for me, primarily through the efforts of Kate Rayworth and her donut economic model. And I don't know how many within the group are actually aware of the metrics on a global scale. I'm kind of hearing the reservations with respect to who's the power and authority kind of behind a model, a global model of that scale. And I think that's right at the center, quite frankly, of what is on the table in this discussion right here, right now, right? I've been doing some work in over recent months with Rutger Hoekstra, who had authored the book Replacing GDP by 2030, and had done some small group work. Basically, it's beyond GDP. But Kate Rayworth and some of the figures around Kate, going back to 2018, there is a paper PDF through academia.edu entitled "A Good Life Within Planetary Boundaries." That's really a pretty significant paper. Thanks.
One incremental idea. You're probably all aware of the DeFi community, decentralized finance, and you probably know some libertarians. I don't sense that there's a bunch of them here on this call, but and they're libertarian. That can mean a whole lot of things. But I think the transition to a non-state currency is, it could happen. I'm not looking forward to that. I think there's a chaos dimension there. But I can imagine a situation. There's been a lot of local currencies. There've been these little things, Berkeley dollars or Berkshire dollars. You go into a store. Oh, you could, we'll sell you a Berkshire dollar for 90 cents. Well, what that means is we just gave you a 10% boost on any money you spend locally. So, there's a lot of experimentation to be done here. And with digital currency, you make it easier. And you can do a proof of stake asset-backed digital currency when it's not designed to go up and down like this. And in fact, it's a green currency. We don't quite have one. I know a couple who are claiming that they're that, but I can anticipate a situation in which we're in fiat currency. We're in US dollars or pounds or euros, and your basic social requirements, your healthcare are locked into that currency, and it's chugging along, but it's limping because, of course, we're in a period of chaos. And meanwhile, people are trying to say, well, we'd like to incentivize you to do this thing. We love volunteers. We can't pay you. We can't pay you the minimum wage. We can't engage the entire government, structure that comes with employees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to pay you to do good things in this currency that you can only spend on good things. but we're not going to decide. You know, we're going to say people. It's like we have this thing here. We have
John. I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you mind if I jump in here?
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No. It's fine. It's just it's very, very difficult with so many people on a call to manage it such that everybody gets a chance to be heard properly. You know what I mean? It's very, and I'm mindful of the fact there's quite a few people that haven't had a chance to say anything at all yet. So yeah, just that. I don't know whether to do this by going back into rooms or whether to stay here and do this, but if we're going to stay in one room, then we all need to really make an effort to be super concise. We all, you know, say one thing and then that's it, make room for the next person to say it, to say what they want to say. And just bringing it back to the focus of what the rooms and the subsequent discussion is about, that what is totalitarianism? What is it we fear? And what is the nature of totalitarianism? And we can either do this here in this room, like for 30 seconds to a minute, each go round and having had the discussion now, distilled in our own minds, what do we now think, right? And each give our 30-second to 1 minute definition of totalitarianism, or we can go off into rooms again and do it, you know, in smaller groups like that, and so each person can have a little bit longer to unpack what they want to say. I see strengths and weaknesses both ways. Can I have a show of hands from the room who would like to do that in here as a single group? And who would? Oh, sorry, I didn't give a chance for hands to come up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. And who would like to do that individually in breakout rooms? 5, sorry. Who would like to do that in breakout rooms instead? Okay, and the rest presumably don't give a shit too much either way. All right, fine. So we'll stay here. We'll stay here. So again, while I've got the floor, I might as well do it. I mean, I said this in the room, but it feels to me like the very essence of totalitarianism is getting people to collectively buy into a lie of some kind, right? Either we are the master race, or, you know, the unvaccinated are dirty, or, you know, the whatever it is, right? Like some element of society is singled out as an enemy and everybody has to go along with that. And if you don't go along with it, you're punished in some way. And it is the buying into that lie, even though you know it's a lie, but you're too frightened to speak out against it, to the point where you even start to believe the lie after a while, even though at some level you know it's a lie. That feels to me to be the real essence of it.
What if it's a virtuous lie in the nature of a myth that creates a vision, such as we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal? That's not self-evident, and it may not even be true, but it's a virtuous mythical principle worth striving for. It's the basis of equity, and it stretches beyond all men to all people. When it was stated by Jefferson, it didn't include women, it didn't include men without property, and it didn't include people without color. Today, universally, even the worst authoritarian totalitarians will pay lip service and hypocrisy to this principle.
Exactly.
Is it a lie or is it a vision? I mean,
it's both. It's both. It's both at the same time, anyway, depending on how it's used, right? It's a lie when it's used to further totalitarian ends. It's a aspirational myth when it's you know, to bring out the best in the society. Sorry, we shouldn't. This is not time for discussion, though. Sorry, my bad. This is not time for discussion. This is 1 minute definitions of totalitarianism. Yeah, both are bad. Never mind. Let's move on. Somebody else jump in.
Well, if I could jump in, just because it kind of relates to that in a way that what I was going to say anyway. Yeah, just these things that have come up about, you know, the freedoms, you know, freedom of speech, and like what you were saying, the Bill of Rights and all that. And, you know, even hearkening back to the Bible, all the thou shalt nots, you know, 10 commandments, like this seems to have been the kind of totalitarianism that has been the kind of constraints that have afforded the greatest freedom so far in the history of humanity. I don't know, maybe there's something better, but so it's a question of selecting those coming up. You know, you can't have too many. You don't want to have 100 commandments or, you know, 100 amendments or whatever you have. Like, you want to have like a handful. So, you know, things have changed. We've had technology, you know, maybe we just need like 1 or 2 more, you know, like you don't have to get vaccinated. Like maybe that'd be a good one. I don't know.
Go on, Jamin.
Thank you. So the definition I want to offer is parallels one that a politician once offered for pornography. He said, listen, I can't give you a precise textual definition of it, but I know it when I see it. right? I think that's the definition I offer is we know it when we see it, and we obviously have it here. In my view, the obvious is it's a totalitarianism of ownership. We're in this possession trance. It's global capitalism, and the rich rise to the top, buy the media, control it through ownership. They buy they buy politicians, control them through ownership, et cetera, et cetera. That's my contribution to the definition. And I think what's much more interesting is that we get onto the topic of what to do about it. But I'll defer to you, Eric. Thank you.
No, not to me, to anyone else that wants to jump in with their definition of totalitarianism. What about you, James? You weren't here for the first one. What about you? Why don't you jump in with what you think of this, seeing as you've only heard half of it? What are your thoughts?
Well, exactly. I've only heard a bit, so I'm kind of just listening. I don't want to hop in and I want to get the full story. But I don't know. My interpretation of totalitarianism, I suppose, would be more or less what you're going on about. It's a contorted result of an original benevolent seed of goodness, basically. It starts out as a seed of goodness, and as you said, a vision, but it gets contorted and twisted because of our own nature and because of the increase of power. That's what it is. Basically, it's letting it in power in the control of a few. Simple and plain. It can't be.
I love that it begins as something aspiring to be good and becomes twisted. That hasn't actually been said explicitly, at least not in the bits I've been involved in. Thank you. That's really good. I think that's really important. Simon,
yeah, well,
Simon, were you going to go? I seem to remember you were going to go before.
Sorry, was that me? Yeah. I guess I'm an anarchist at heart, and I just subscribe to one basic principle, which is do no harm. And totalitarianism is just taking it to an extreme where somebody else seeks to tell me how I should live my life with the threat of force if I don't comply. It serves no purpose except for those who want to force their will upon me for no real benefit to anybody other than themselves. So you've got to fight against that because they'll do it if they're allowed to.
It's another really good point. So it seeks only to perpetuate itself, right? It has no goals outside of perpetuating itself.
To frame it in an evolutionary sense, and kind of what I've heard touched upon, I think, is a distinction between in-group and kind of the quality of in-group relations and intent with respect to evolutionary advantage. This is the distinction that Wilson is trying to drive home between conventional, traditional concept of selection and group selection, is that the individual within the group, this idea of survival of the fittest, the individual who is exertive over the well-being of the group, it kind of is serving one's own best interests, has the advantage, evolutionary advantage, as a kind of a function of the survival of the fittest. That doesn't hold in between groups with respect to competition. It is the more altruistic group as a whole, which will have the evolutionary advantage over the group that is more individually oriented. So So I believe what the prospect of what is happening is a massive shift in paradigm from individualism to collectivism, but the collectivism of the whole as opposed to the individual.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
I think totalitarianism relates to the imposition of complete control by the state over the daily life and political processes of a population without any mitigating checks and balances of other narratives that could exercise power or control, such as the rule of law or religious power. It was Hannah Arendt was the first person to start articulating a definition of the totalitarian state, and her examples were, of course, Nazism and Stalinism. But there's a kind of totalitarianism that is almost unconscious that you've been alluding to, that there are institutions taking over the daily lives and consciousness of the population without having to exercise what we normally identify as overt imposition of power, like Harari's been talking about that extensively. And when you start thinking about the capacity of artificial intelligence and quantum computing and data mining, and soon, post-COVID, we're going to want to have children having their DNA swabbed without comparable checks and balances over power over information, power over manipulation. We can end up with a totalitarianism that doesn't look like those models. It's almost unobservable. But the traditional definition is when a small group of people have control of the state and the daily lives of everybody and information without checks and balances.
I think that's a pretty good definition. Jamin, I see your hand up, but I wanted to give Parmjit a chance to jump in. She's been sitting there very quietly, hasn't said anything. So if you'd like to, here's your chance to jump in.
Thank you. It's a good point to jump in, actually, because following Jonathan's comment, I would like us to consider how far are we from being controlled by a very small number of units in terms of entity. For example, corporations have been merging and merging and merging. We don't necessarily know each time a merger takes place. I mean, when I was younger, there was the Monopolies and Merger Commission. I'd never see anything about that particular commission. And what I hear on the grapevine is that now that there are actually two companies, and somewhere along the line, they've got links to or they own, everything that's under that umbrella. So if that's not totalitarianism, I'm struggling to find what definition it would be. And then I have obviously lots of concerns over kind of things that we've taken for granted for centuries, like currency, and it's been slowly eroded from, for example, being gold-backed to, I think it was the 70s, where they decided it doesn't need to be gold-backed anymore. And yet we're all still going along with that currency with no backing, no net, no safety net. And the banks are at liberty, the private banks, to issue as much debt as they can. That there is no limit to that. And we're not party to the mechanisms that go on behind the scenes because we're not educated about that. Even if we're studying finance or economics, it remains a black box largely to most of us. So, I think we're pretty deep in the shit, to be honest, in various ways, at various angles. That's my offering.
Yeah, the poor education of the population in the things that really matter in the culture, right, is yet another feature. Jamin, you had your hand up before. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I just want to offer perspective building off of what Brian was talking about the comparative advantage of a benevolent society or group or community. And as a parallel, if you think of humanity 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, we were a tiny, tiny fraction of the biosphere and really relatively powerless. And then we started cooperating, communicating, collaborating, and we, rose in power and our ability to produce and store food and all that sort of thing. And then everything kind of went to hell over the last 10,000 years as population skyrocketed. But if we start with that basic principle that a relatively small group, through benevolent cooperation, can achieve great things, I think the answer is sitting right in front of us. See, part of totalitarianism is a built-in stupidity of a very limited number of people basically calling all the shots, designing society, designing this and that. That's inherently stupid. Now, if even 1% of humanity were to join this collective intelligence movement that we're pioneering here in many other places, I think we would find an incredible comparative advantage, because our collective intelligence would run circles around all of the totalitarian governments and banks put together. And then we could actually set about orchestrating a global transformation, a benevolent global transformation, being that most intelligent entity on the planet. So I just wanted to offer that up as a possibility. And also mention at the top of the hour, some of us are going to go into a breakout room where we're going to be focusing on certain specific aspects of this, namely feeding everyone, cooling the planet, and transitioning to a plant-based diet. That'll be at the top of the hour. Anyway, just wanted to offer those thoughts and loving the conversation. Thank you.
There's actually a word for what you said that the UN has adopted called human security. And that's the organizing principle. In 2012, there was a GA resolution that basically redefined security, not based on national militarism, but based on pretty much the metrics that you laid out, except changing eating habits. But it was a recognition of the fundamental human rights, and thus the sanctity of the individual. And second, the necessity of global cooperation in meeting global threats. But the emphasis was on the metric for the success of governance is people's fundamental freedoms, freedom from want, economic security, personal security, human security, rather than the security of the state as the core model. So there's a name for it, and the Secretary General has been pushing it. There's a group of friends of the Secretary General trying to challenge the national security state model of security to a global human security model. And I think that's, I had a debate with Jerry Brown, who's I think brilliant visionary. He wants to call it planetary realism. It's the same idea. It's the same idea. It compels, and I think your insight that evolutionary biologists are now realizing that the pseudo-Darwinian model of domination and power is not what has made humans so successful. It has been cooperation and use of our collective intelligence rather than domination of nature. That's a big shift.
Go on, Simon.
Yeah, I just have a question, really. I mean, Parmjit was saying about, it's BlackRock and Vanguard, isn't it, that pretty much own everything. But just a question, in the UK, an example of totalitarianism in my mind, in the UK, our government supposedly at the moment are referring to something called SAGE, which is letters that something that stands for something. But we're told, again, what Parmjit was saying, but we're not told what's going on. People think that that's all scientists, virologists, epidemiologists, etc. But a cornerstone of that group in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in North America, is behavioral scientists. which I find incredibly creepy. You know, that the government have got people that are there whose the whole role is to manipulate us in terms of what we think collectively. And if they were honest with us, I'm sure the vast majority of people would want those people gone. So maybe, you know, going back to Jamin's question about, you know, how we tackle this, just for people to know that there are behavioral scientists trying to figure out how to control us would be a major step forward.
It goes back to what I can't remember who it was saying before, that you know, the telling of a lie in order to achieve a positive end kind of thing, that is that justified? Like getting everyone to buy into a lie for their own good kind of thing, is that justified? Or is that still, well, I suppose it is still totalitarianism, but anyway, whatever. Tom, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to say about it, but just this notion of benevolent leadership, or benevolent, like this word benevolence is a kind of, I don't know, it just raises something in my head that's like, I don't know about that. Like, is you know, it's like being in a relationship when, you know, it's it's all too good and nice and cuddly, or you know, like it's like you need some, like it might actually be good to have assholes in power, because then you've got your eyes open and so on and so forth. So, but I don't know, just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things to throw in. The idea of benevolent leadership, I think is maybe a red herring, right? The truism of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This seems to hold pretty much true across the board. I mean, there have been some highly enlightened souls who, with the adoration of the crowd and, you know, being treated as a god, fell into exactly the same ego traps that we all do, right? And so I think the notion of benevolent leadership is a red herring, and we've got to figure out a way to distribute leadership such that it can never concentrate in the hand. You know, this is another way of framing the challenge. And this thing about rights, George Carlin did a bit on this many years ago, which I think captures it. If any of you familiar with his bit, I'm sort of going to be harvesting from that. But this idea of rights as this fundamental thing handed down by God. Well, if they're handed down by God, then why do some people get different rights to other people, right? And, you know, why are they temporary? Why do they have to be written down? If they're actual rights, then no one can ever take them away from you, right? The fact that they can be taken away from you means that they're not rights, they're privileges. They are temporary privileges granted by our masters, right? And so whenever I hear the word rights and writing down every human being is entitled to blah, 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 well, says who, right? Says who? There is some authority granting those rights. And so straight away, we're in an authoritarian trap, right? Because someone in authority is granting rights to everybody else. And so rights have to be conceived of not as a thing which are given and written down, but as a thing which we are all responsible for. Your rights are my responsibilities, and vice versa, right? And until every single one of us as individuals get that, then it's just more authoritarianism, right? Deciding who gets what rights, you know, it's bullshit at a deep level, in my opinion.
Eric, if I can jump in with that, because there's a kind of a counterpart to a philosophical tenet I wanted to offer, and kind of what I've been saying to this point, and with respect to integral theory and practice. There's a real basic distinction between epistemology, the discipline of knowledge, as its capacity to empower, generally speaking. That is arguably a primary function of epistemology. The other counterpart to that would be ontological, which is being, but the primary function arguably being that of liberation. So those are very, very elemental with respect to the idea of consciousness or human experience and how that translates, you know, into anything, structure, you know. that was one of the points I wanted to make. The other one you had in mentioning that the design of a system, how crucial it is that it is distributed. So that's absolutely true. And this is something that there again, Kate Rayworth in her model of circular economics acknowledges that it is distributed economics and it is also regenerative. So these are two key terms that are really important with respect to the design of any sort of system. Right? Thanks.
Is there anyone who hasn't spoken that would like to? Okay, well, I mean, I need to actually head off in the next 10 minutes or so. So I thought it might be sensible to set, you know, a sort of theme for what we're going to talk about next week. I mean, obviously, we're going to wander off a little bit as we have done today, and that's absolutely fine. That's the nature of exploration, right? So I was going to propose. I see you, Jonathan. I'll make way for you in just a second. I would like to propose that we maybe spend next week talking about the tools and methodologies of totalitarianism, right? How it comes about and how it maintains itself and tightens its grip once it has come about. And do we see any of those things at play in the world today? That's sort of what I'm thinking about. So yeah, that's my proposal for what we talk about next week, and it gives those that wish to a chance to do some research and preparation, whatever, if they want to. Right, no pressure on anyone to do that, but if they want to, it gives them an opportunity to do so. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was asked to advise the Civic Chamber of the Duma, which is an entity that licenses every civic society organization in Russia several years ago. So if you want to start a bowling league, you have to get them to let you do it. A political party, a religious organization, anything. And so the head of it, the room was divided into like people who'd grown up before Glasnost and Perestroika and people who'd grown up after it. And the people running it were the older ones. Mr. Granov, we wanted to know how you in America ensure that civil society is of benefit to the security of the state. This was recently. How do you ensure that civil society is of benefit to the state? And I said, I can't answer that question. I have no experience in it. My life has been devoted to ensuring that the state is of benefit to civil society. That where I come from, we try to keep in mind that the state is the employee and the people are the employer. So in the totalitarian model, the state is always the employer and the people are the employee. In the model that we would like is the people are the employer and the state's only justification is in service to the people rather than the totalitarian model. And I just thought that, so the question should be both. In other words, how do we ensure that the state is a benefit to the people, to civil society, keep our fundamental freedoms, and how does the totalitarian capacity emerge? Right now, there's 100 companies, corporations produce 80% of the carbon emissions. And they don't do it because there's people in those corporations trying to destroy the planet. These are de jure institutions. They're created by law. So they're actually ultimately created by the state. So it comes back to how do we ensure that the state is a benefit to the people rather than the other way around? There's just a framework of thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean that's how governments sell themselves to us at the moment, right? Is that they are employees of the people. But I've got to say, this is another thing that troubles me, and maybe we get into this more next week. Another thing that troubles me is that it seems to me in recent years governments have given up even on the pretense of being of service to the people, right? They're not even talking the talk anymore. Not that they ever really walk the walk, but they're not even talking the talk anymore. And that seems to me that they're so comfortable and certain that they don't, yeah. So that's troubling to me.
And seemingly getting away with that, with it without accountability. That's the thing, quite frankly. I mean, I'm incredulous at the local level over the last year, year and a half or so, in terms of how COVID-19 has kind of allowed that scenario to become an actuality. It's very, very intimidating as a human being.
Yeah, I started writing a short piece recently, and at the end of that, I made the point that could you have imagined 2 years ago being locked in your home, keeping your kids home from school, blah, 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 like all of the restrictions that have been imposed on us. Could you imagine that 2 years ago? No, of course not, but it happened one little step at a time, and every single step seemed, at least to most people, somewhat reasonable from where we were at the time, right? And before you know it, you've given up like your whole fucking life, like how on earth did this happen? If you'd fallen asleep for 18 months and woken up, you go, what the fuck has happened here?
It's like anything that creeps in slowly. It's just like the collapsed buildings in Miami there, really. Basically, it's just water erosion that slowly got in because of the ground the bedrock is limestone, so it penetrated the limestone and eventually got into the iron in the foundations, and it weakened the building and collapsed it. And that's the problem, you see, is that the majority of people are in the dark, because when something happens and comes upon them very, very slowly, they don't notice it at all. So in actual fact, we all live in a cloud of what we believe to be a society of democracy, when we have no democracy whatsoever. It's completely has been taken from us for a long time now. Our governments do not work for us. They don't and have not worked for us for a long time. But they do everything that is contrary to what the common man sees when he watches the news. He's saying, what the fuck are they doing that for? You know what I mean? The common man can see that the majority of them they're no different than ourselves, and they're not benevolent by any means, and they're not far more intelligent by any means. If anything, they're probably just far less intelligent of the majority of the average person on the street. It's just that they're in the position where they can be bought, and that's simple and plain. And they have been bought, and our democracy has been bought, and it has been corroded out from underneath us slowly. It's different when you see totalitarianism taking over in a different form, such as we said, the Al-Qaeda. I mean, Al-Qaeda started out in Afghanistan. They came about as a benevolent society who wanted to put an end to the civil wars that were constantly reigning throughout Afghanistan for decades and decades, or centuries even. And that was their main thing, was they wanted to take the war out of society. And that was a given backed idea. It was a benevolent idea, and the people backed it. And when they did take over in Afghanistan initially, the people were happy with it, and they started off benevolent. But as soon as they took Kabul, they changed their political views, and then they started enforcing their will upon the people. So it came in quicker there. It was much more noticeable. What's happening in the Western world is that it has creeped in upon us slowly, and now the majority of the people are born into it, so they don't know anything different.
Yeah, we've had elections replaced with soap opera, right? I mean, that's all it is. Are you guys familiar with the term kayfabe? Do you know what kayfabe is? Kayfabe is it's like buying into a lie, right? Like wrestling is kayfabe, right? Like everyone who watches it, they know it's fake, they know it's scripted, and yet they watch it as though it were unfolding, as a live event. This is what kayfabe is, and we've allowed real political discourse to be substituted for kayfabe, right? And we all pretend like it's important and it matters and that it's serving us and that we have some influence over it, right? We all pretend that, and yet we all know it's bullshit, and we keep playing along with it anyway. It's a mystery to me. It's a mystery to me, the amount of time people spend talking about, oh, I hate Biden because of this, I hate Trump because of this, blah, 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 completely missing the point that all of this doesn't matter anymore. This is not what governs us. if the role of the president of the US was actually an important and powerful position, do we honestly think Donald Trump and Joe Biden would be the two people contesting for it? Do you know what I mean? Like, seriously, is that the best we can do for the most important position of governance that exists on this planet? You know, if it was actually meaningful and important, these are not the kind of bozos that would be standing for it, you know? So it's, the whole thing is nonsense, and yet we treat it as though it's real and important. It's kayfabe. It's kayfabe. Perfect. It's a perfect description of what kayfabe is.
Well, do we have any solutions to the situation? There, Jamin's raising up. I mean, yeah, we've got to.
Do you know what? That's a really great. This is a really, really great segue, Jim, into Jamin's meeting. So I'm actually going to head off. I need to go now. I'm going to head off. Everyone else is welcome to stay, and Jamin will organise rooms if you want to stay and talk about this, or if you want to join in with what Jamin's talking about. He'll be very happy to organise it either way for you. So yes, anyone that wishes to hang around is very welcome to do so. It's been very pleasing to me that so many people have turned up and contributed so constructively and so meaningfully to this conversation. It's been, I think, really an excellent first one out of the gate. So yeah, thanks all to you very much for coming and attending. I'm going to stop the recording now.